Good morning on the West Coast, good afternoon on the East Coast, and happy days everywhere in between. Today is Wednesday, July 26th, and it's the dog days of summer, my friends. I'm John Yarrington, CEO of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a 501c6 not-for-profit trade association dedicated to promoting, protecting, and advancing the direct-to-consumer and direct response advertising industries. And on behalf of the entire PDMI family, it's my pleasure to welcome you to yet another fun-filled and exciting episode of the PDMI Take 20. As a reminder, the PDMI Take 20 is a quick-hitting roundtable discussion led by industry experts on trending topics, all in 20 minutes or less. Today, we're joined by a trio of talented industry leaders, including Fabrice Gould of Diggen, Emily Kistner of Adstra, and Dan Otto of Intelligent Handshake. And together, we'll be discussing the latest in dataspines and datagraphs. However, before we get started, please allow me to do a little housekeeping. If you'd like to ask a question, and we encourage you to do so, please use the questions tab located in the control panel. Also, please note you're welcome to ask questions throughout today's conversation, but we ask that you hold all replies to the end of today's discussion. Alrighty, folks, with that said, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Mosquitoes refuse to bite him purely out of respect. He's the fearless Chris Foster. Chris is Vice President of New Business Development at Modern Postcard, a direct marketing agency located in Carlsbad, California. In addition to his day job, Chris teaches brand strategies at UCSD Extension courses, and he's the chairperson of the PDMI Brand Response Council. As always, Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you, and for the 70th time, because we are on our 70th episode. That's right, 70. Wow. Take it away, my friend. Take it away.
Thank you, John, so much, and welcome in everybody for your very first Take 20. We're so excited to have you, and we're honored that you would choose us to spend some of your time and, more importantly, share some of your insights. It is episode 20. We are talking about data spines and various attributes across data graphs. And the reason we wanted to talk about this is that the landscape of actionable data is changing just as rapidly as other areas in the performance marketing world. For definition's sake, an identity graph is a database that creates linkages between all identifiers that are associated with an individual customer. Call it people-based marketing or personalization. The gist is that with an ID graph, a marketer can stitch together social media, IP address, email, phone, cookies, and even offline identifiers like loyalty card numbers and postal addresses. The ID graph is a way to make actionable data more actionable than ever, and it allows marketers to implement omni-channel ads that are more targeted and synchronously timed better than ever before, whether your customer views the ad on a desktop, mobile, CTV, or even via direct mail. So some ID graphs include groups like BlockGraph. They're a separate entity owned by Comcast, Universal, Charter, Communications, and Paramount, TransUnion, TrueData, Adstra, and other businesses like that. And speaking of Adstra, we're just going to jump in and we'll have Emily start us off. She's going to dive into the details of how these players in the data space are seeing ID graphs work in the real performance marketing space. So Emily, first, welcome in. And secondly, please help us understand the terms of identity graph and identity spine. Are they one and the same? It's funny, you were mentioning they aren't quite the same, but they're close. It's like someone asking the difference between whiskey and bourbon, right? All bourbon's whiskey, but not all whiskey is bourbon. Can you help us understand the distinctions?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm sure that some people colloquially use these two terms interchangeably, but there is a difference between a graph and a spine. So an identity graph are usually a set of raw signals, and there's a lot of different kinds of graphs, right? You can have a PII graph, an email graph, mobile ad IDs, IP, etc. So a graph is just raw data. It's kind of like bones in the body, right? It's a very important building block, but they don't do a lot just on their own. Where a spine connects all of these signals together in a way that allows them to be interactive, and it's dynamic in collecting these identity signals. So in translating them, in allowing them to work together with other data sets. So think of the spine in our bodies, right? It contains bones, but it also has nerves, joints, muscles, and it's what allows all of these different individual assets to work together. So same thing with an identity spine. It can connect media exposure, attribute data, PII, anonymous identifiers, first and third party data, all of these data feeds back to a persistent person and household level. And that is what enables all forms of advertising activation and of performance measurement. So a spine is kind of serves as like the source of truth and is the central support structure for the whole operation. So yes, all spines have a graph, but not all graphs are used as a spine.
Wonderful. I love it. That's an outstanding definition. And congratulations on making such interesting ideas be translated into plain speak instead of marketing speak. Well done. The idea of a single source of truth, I think, is phenomenal, because all performance marketing businesses are looking not only for the data, but you also mentioned attribution. So I do want to touch on that later. But I guess, Fabrice, you've been in the data business for over 25 years. What have you seen being some of these huge benefits of developing these types of ID graphs?
It's funny when I think of this question, because when you're so close to it, you don't see the big changes day to day, doing it all day. But you got me thinking about back when I first started discovering, knowing who the person was on the other side. And it was actually at General Electric, my first job, building out the e-commerce platform. And we had this little startup, I think it was about year 2000, when I was right finishing Y2K. And we had this little startup called Eloqua. We all know them now. They came to us as a little startup and said, hey, can we put our tech on your website? I said, sure, let's check it out. And all of a sudden I had this dashboard that I'm seeing these emails on our sitemap. And it was just mind blowing to me. So that was my first experience of knowing who are these people on the website. And that was the eye-opening moment where an identity graph is really about identifying those individuals and what you do with that. So I know we have kind of taken some slow pathways since then. I think a lot of us do. I like to think of like an identity graph that we all do, which is just matching in spreadsheets. I know no one will actually mention it, but we all kind of do that behind the scenes. It's not the best rules and so forth. But what we really do on our platform is kind of programmatically make that scalable. So I actually work with Dan. They're going to ask a question next with Intelligent Handshake. And we spent the last 6 years building out our data cloud and the identity graph. But it was funny, you actually mentioned TransUnion. That was our last venture that we sold off through Targus Info. So we're proud about our new iteration of identity graph that's really, really agnostic. I know we talk mostly about people in marketing, but our identity graph is really about different types of entities. They can be people, business, residential, places like you mentioned with address, and even you get into IoT devices many people don't see in an identity graph, identifying the things on the internet. So it's really combining all of it. You can see where you talked about, Emily, all these signals coming in. Sounds so simple, but when you're getting millions, maybe even billions of signals a day, it just gets really complicated. So that evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it, of changing it, makes it so much easier for people to use it in an identity graph to do the true marketing to an individual.
That's awesome. And I guess, Dan, speaking of that history, right? You're literally a rocket science. As a note, guys, Dan's truly a rocket science.
Well, I blow up rockets, let's put it that way.
So as the past has come up to now, what do you see as kind of the new technologies that are coming up to help shape and maybe change and strengthen these ID graphs?
All right, so I'm the marketing science guy, actually the applied marketing science guy, marketing engineering. And so when I go through the process of using the data graphs, we gather the information. Everybody's pretty good about how they gather it, how they process it and store it and recall it. We're getting better at how we analyze it. The ETL process and the modeling, we've got all sorts of resources for that. And when it comes to operational stuff, with the identification, real-time identification, and the application, how we react to it, how we analyze it, and we get into the analyze and react cycles with that. That's all pretty good. But the underlying fact on every one of those steps is computer processing. And we're kind of coming up to a flat point on Moore's law here as far as computer processing, and we're looking for the next leap. And there's actually a quantum leapfrog out there that's just in the code stages, but that when we apply that to artificial intelligence and quantum computing and marketing science, And then we can get down to instantaneous reactivity when somebody comes to visit a website or dials up on the phone here. So that's where I see it now, is this big leap from Moore's law to Nevin's law, and the relationship there is Nevin's law is Moore's law squared. So the advancements in that will come, much exponentially faster than Moore had predicted.
That's fantastic. It's funny because people say not only are things changing faster, but actually the rate of change is increasing as well. So it's almost like a compounding effect when you have, this improvement in quantum, computing and AI, and we can have that instant recognizability even faster than before. I think that it's going to be a fascinating thing, and it create a lot of aha moments in the future. But Emily, can you share with us one of the aha moments you had when you started to make some of this data actionable for your clients?
Yes. Now I'm thinking about AI. I could go in another direction. Something we've been talking about a lot internally at Adstra. That's a big focus this upcoming year. But okay, so that aside, so traditionally in the ad tech space to date, a lot of these identity spine type of operations, so like reconciling these disparate data sets, validating these linkages, translating out to different endpoints for marketing purposes, all of that has really kind of been handled by marketing service divisions of credit bureaus. That maybe some of them have already been mentioned here, but credit data is highly regulated and it can't leave the bureau's walls. So for many years now, publishers, platforms, brands, they've all had to send their first party data outside of their walls. And I think for those not even in our industry, you're aware of a lot of these consumer sentiment, increasing legislation around all this personal data, floating around the ecosystem. So at Adstra, our identity graph and our enterprise matching engine are cloud-based, and it's fully operational inside of our client's environment. And we validate these linkages with a partner outside of the credit space. So all of our data is permissioned and it's portable to go into our clients' walls. So that's the aha moment. That's never been done before. No other identity company is doing that. And in fact, they have businesses that are dependent on them not allowing that to happen. So that's a huge aha moment with our clients. Marketers have never had full control and transparency over their data, speed, efficiency. They've always had to send it out to somebody else. So enabling brands to do this in-house is not only increasing privacy protection, but it's also improving efficiency, data aggregation costs, integrity of the data in this really innovative way. So I'll give a quick example just of this in practice of one of our enterprise clients, Otto. So some of their client-facing brands you might know are sites like Auto Trader or Kelley Blue Book. So they have over 20 brands. They have huge amounts of first-party data, digital API, lots of data coming in lots of different sources. So a few years ago, the Otto leadership team decided that they didn't want to send consumer data out of their walls anymore. So they were going to build an in-house spine. So they licensed our graph and our spine, our enterprise engine connects that, and they achieved 5x lift in connectivity by taking their identity resolution in-house. And that 5x equates to $85 million in 2022, $85 million. So their email marketing open rate tripled, their email click-through rate increased by 8x, and the value generated from their ad targeting tripled. So that's just in 1 year, and all of this is still growing in 2023. So there's huge potential in taking control of your identity data and in using a spine in this innovative way. It more than pays for itself. $85 million.
Yeah, that's astonishing. It's a wonderful case study, and I think that it gets to where Dan was talking about that instant level of real-time ID and responding, right? And the value of that to the client. So Fabrice, for you, have you seen some of the best practices in real-time responsiveness to help marketers engage and convert to that kind of level and to the kind of success that Emily spoke to?
Yeah, so to me, it's not a sexy answer because it's always the same answer we hear in marketing, but to me, it's really about there's so much technology to apply. There's something we're going to learn tomorrow that's going to be net new. It's really about knowing your business and your metrics. It's always going to be my answer. And again, it's not sexy, but if you know your metrics, we always say know your business, know your customer, KYC. To me, that's the most important component, right? Because we're always testing different ways of doing things. And if you can test something net new, you get a hypothesis, you want to test it tomorrow. That's what we're constantly doing and seeing, you know, our A control from yesterday is our net new crazy thing to try out tomorrow. The B is, does it improve the numbers? Great, we can make incremental improvements. And that kind of makes it a little more evolutionary than a big revolutionary change. Like you say, we're not going to magically make $85 million, so congratulations. Love kind of a case study like that. But that's essentially what we're doing even with Intelligent Handshake is a lot of our direct response clients, and we actually work on phone inbound calls for sales as well as the web. So it's another kind of dynamic working with telcos of the SS7 networks, but also working on the web and applying the same technology in both of those networks. And all we're doing is really determining how can we make it very simplistic to do a deployment with Intelligent Handshake capabilities, because I always go back to when I first started and I learned about marketing. Marketing was very simple, right? It was like build something cool and someone converted because they thought it was interesting. Now it's getting so complex. All of a sudden, marketing is taking over what organizations do, and all of a sudden you got sales involved and engineering. God forbid I say now you're getting finance and legal on the compliance side. It's just becoming so demanding. So you have all these variables you got to figure out, and it's not just saying implement something. You got to have all these different functional units contributing to its success. So it always comes back to the metrics and making sure you make those conversions. So to be honest, we don't have like a magic recipe that just says, you know, install this and you're going to make more money. It's really a little bit of a art and science that we apply between the data and the technology, but also on the marketing side, there's the creative, the offer to increase those conversions. Always comes back to metrics.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think what's, you know, the new roles of data scientists like Dan helps to translate some of the creative ideas into actual practice. Of course, you have to figure out the compliance side. And Fabrice, you spoke with, you know, how marketing now touches, you know, all of these various areas within a business. So I guess, Dan, one thing I'll ask you, with data privacy regulations that are changing, how does an ID graph then help protect brands and consumers and almost like a shield wall against, you know, those kind of, you know, challenging issues with the compliance laws?
Well, yeah, the first thing is that once you have all your data connected, accessibility across the team is just increased. There's shared goals, there's shared security protocols on it. But then let me be a little bit contrarian here, is that we use a lot of sensitive data from the client. We use transactional data from the client to actually customize our models for that particular product. All right, so that's kind of sensitive information here. That's not connected to our data spine directly. In fact, we have 2 data spines, and the spine we keep that on is highly secure. Nobody gets to it. It does talk back to the main operational spine, but only through very severe security protocols, and all the data is anonymized at that point here. So we're very protective about that.
That's fantastic.
We have 2 spines, but we only have 2 spines, and so that makes it much easier to manage when you only look at it.
No, that's excellent. That's a great answer for it. And I guess, you know, because we're right at around 20 minutes already, but I do have one question for all of you. We'll just go around the horn. Emily, we'll start with you. So if we have this exact same Take 20 topic, right? We're talking about ID graphs again, and it's in 12 and 18 months. What do you think the talking points would be then? I know, Emily, you kind of whispered or hinted at AI. I don't know if that's going to be in it. So, so what do you think we're going to be talking about 12 or 18 months from now?
Of course, yes. I hope that I'll have some AI forward feature that I'm talking about with you all. That's a huge focus for us this year. From a privacy perspective, I think that there will be a lot less PII exchanged in our ecosystem. We're already seeing that now with the rise of all these clean room tech integrations and people starting to in-house their graphs on the brand side and on the platform side. So I think that'll continue. And then from an identity perspective, I think there will be a lot more reliance on IP, particularly IPv6. We'll see a big increase in the amount of media that runs through connected devices. We're already seeing that. And maybe even some new device signals. I don't know about 12 months from now, but 5 years from now, we'll be measuring maybe some ad effectiveness on like your refrigerator or your thermostat.
Right. Your Internet of Things. That's right.
Yeah.
In your car. In your car. It's true.
Yes. Yeah.
Fabrice, what about you?
So I think this has been a life goal of mine. So I don't know if it's going to be 12 to 18 months, but to me, it's almost like the democratization of all this, right? It's, you know, tech is, again, I always say it's about tech, features and benefits, but the real benefit is all these enterprises could spend all the money on AI and learning and analytics. I love the ability to make an equal playing field for all businesses, right? So you talk to a smaller business, whether it's retail or e-commerce that's, you know, doing smaller revenue size, they just say, I don't have a data strategy. I don't know how to monetize data. And then when you show them that they actually are sitting on data and not using it, that's where all this technology applied will help them benefit all the metrics I was talking about. So what I'm hoping is it just makes it that much more accessible. And you see that with AI. You know, you got people that didn't even know what a computer was. Now all of a sudden, like, cool, I want to play around with ChatGPT and learn something. So I'm hoping that it just becomes much easier to compete when you're competing over, you know, such large organizations.
Wonderful. Dan, bring us home.
I'll be real simplistic about it. I hope we're not talking about cookies in the past tense.
We don't think that you will be.
Right. That was excellent, you guys. That went very quickly. We're already past 20 minutes plus. Johnny, do we got some questions from the audience?
Hey everyone, I told you it would fly by quickly. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. Let me start off with somewhat of a basic level question, and I think that'll get us started here. What kind of lift can a marketer expect to experience when properly implementing a data graph to their campaign? Anyone, going once, going twice.
I'll give an example. So we have this offering called pre-boarding. So it's basically before you send your data to an onboarder, if you hydrate your first party data before you send it to your onboarder, it makes you more effective with your match rates. So we have advertisers that want to take a CRM list. So it's email based or name address based. You got to translate that to a phone number for TikTok advertising. So before you send your data to an onboarder like LiveRamp, if you take your data strategy in-house, hydrate that before you onboard it. We saw the last advertiser we did this for, 132% lift on their match rate going into TikTok. So I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, but depending on the data you're looking at, I mean, enough to pay for the cost of the data that you're adding into your strategy, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example of onboarding because I blank, identity graphs is really a tool. So it's hard to correlate a tool to like the lift in your campaigns, but it's essential to make sure you have your data cleansed and accurate.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think what they were the questioner was kind of referring to was if I start utilizing this tool, implementing it within my campaign, would I experience a positive, growth factor? And I think you guys kind of approached that. So thank you very much. Here's another question for you. There's obviously a lot of interest from brands and marketers in this space. What do you think the next 12 months look like for growth and uses of technology in this space?
I'll jump in a little bit. I think that where a lot of the usage is going to happen is with attribution, right? In this industry, attribution is, not only is it the third rail that no one wants to talk about, but it's also the rail that everyone wants to talk about, because whether it's multi-touch, whether it's last touch, how you actually weigh the efforts and the impact of various channels and impressions, I think is always going to be somewhat mysterious. My hunch, though, is that the effectiveness of a data spine or an ID graph helps you figure out attribution much more closely, right? It might not be that last impression, maybe the one that the customer responds to, but it's all the previous impressions that actually warmed them up and made them interested, made them, more engaged to consider the brand. And I think that what you can do with this, though, is look at the number of impressions, the length of impressions, the patterns of impressions, the sequences, whether if there are 8 impressions, from various channels that you're giving them, but you're finding that a majority of your revenue is coming from people who see these 3 channels in this type of sequence. I think that could be very powerful to help, shave spend, to help understand spend, if not, reduce budget.
I'm
Good
going
feedback,
to give a bizarre example because I've recently discovered, you know, even if you're getting the conversions, it's a little bit of a macroeconomic concept. But, you know, when you can prove that you can increase someone's conversions by 20%, that's not as important as them knowing, having the confidence of the economy. And I'm mentioning this because we had successful campaigns, but we learned they didn't have the product to ship out because of inventory and logistics, and it was stuck on a container in the middle of during the pandemic. So there's all these other little variables. And to me, like when you're building a business and you don't have predictability in it, you don't want to invest more money into technology. So the more the business owners and executives have the confidence of growing, they're going to heavily invest into the future because you see it in the numbers.
Fabrice is always hammering on me for not predicting COVID, so.
Come on, Dan, you were better than that.
Dan, should have been better. Should have been. That was
Different kind of science. To your point.
All right, let's move on to another question here. Are more heavily regulated industries, healthcare, pharma, financial services, finding greater opportunities in this tech and less regulated industries? If so, or if not, why?
So I came from the healthcare data space. I worked at a pharmaceutical data company prior. Healthcare was way ahead of this. This is doing measurement, especially television ad effectiveness, digital measurement on a pseudonymous key is always how pharma has done it. So I think highly regulated industries, we are catching up to them in the digital measurement space from the identity perspective anyway. That's old hat to them.
I also look at it from the lens of the type of data. Usually when it's something regulated, most, you know, maybe as a data tech guy behind the scenes, people don't want to touch certain data. You get into PII and HIPAA. We actually run towards it because we know how to protect it and we follow the regulations. So it's a little unique to us, but I see where people want to walk away from it because there's an extra level of security and regulation that you got to follow, and it's constantly changing. This is not something set in stone. Continually dynamically changing.
Good stuff, thank you. Well, before we close out here, is there anything you guys want to add? Any final thoughts?
When's the next 20?
Right on. Let me come on in and close this out with you guys. Wait for my picture to arrive here. There I am. All right, guys, phenomenal session. Fabrice, Emily, Dan, Chris, great conversation today. Thank you so much for your time, energy, and effort. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed today's conversation as much as I did. Before we close out, I'd like to take a moment to invite you to our next PDMI Take 20, which is hosted on Wednesday, August 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. I'd also like to remind you that PDMI's fall conference, PDMI West, is scheduled for October 9th through 11th in San Diego at the Intercontinental Hotel. For those planning to stay on site at the Intercontinental, hotel rooms are available for registered badge holders at a discounted rate. To get your attendee badges and hotel rooms today, please visit thepdmi.com. That's thepdmi.com. Thanks a lot, everyone, for joining us this time, and we'll see you next time. Make it a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.